destroying Iran or killing another 2 million people in Iraq and Syria will not actually add anything to Israel's long-term security.
Hello and welcome to the More Freedom Foundation podcast. I am Murray McElhone, in charge of podcasting, and in charge of politics is Robert Morris. How are you this week?
Not bad, not bad. Yet another crazy week in U.S. politics. We've got Kamala Harris has chosen the vice presidential candidate.
The Bulldog, I believe.
Is that a nickname that he has?
Well, that's what I heard. He seems like ex-American football coach for schools, was it? I think he doesn't really beat around the bush. He's quite direct.
Yeah, it's interesting, the sort of differing interpretations. You know, he is as expected, he is a white guy to balance out the ticket or what have you. But he is a fascinating guy, and it has been interesting watching people learn more about him and these sort of differing interpretations. It's funny you say the Bulldog. I've seen that interpretation more and more. Whereas the way that people have been thinking about him, the way I'd been thinking about him is like, oh, he's so nice. He's such a nice Midwestern guy.
Well, he's able to balance both, it seems.
Yeah. He's got some aggression and some very Midwestern dadness.
But he does come across as a lot more down to earth than previous Democratic candidates.
Yeah, that's definitely. There was a lot of talk that the last two frontrunners, or it came down to two guys to be Kamala Harris's vice president. One was Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, and then the guy who eventually won, Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota. And there was a lot of talk about Shapiro might be seen as too friendly towards Israel because he's, and a lot of speculation that it came down to that. But it was an interesting point, I think was made on like the Ezra Klein podcast I listened to yesterday. It's like, Josh Shapiro, in a lot of ways, is way too similar to Kamala Harris. They are both
from a legal background?
Yes. It'd be unfair to call him a coastal elite, but he is like, he was a prosecutor. He is a legal guy. I mean, they hit a lot of the same squares. Mm-hmm. And Tim Walz is really, really likable on a range of levels. I mean, he just is. And I think it's smart because Kamala Harris certainly has African-American roots, has Indian roots that might be seen as like a differentiation. But the more important differentiation from Middle America is just that, you know, she's hyper-successful elite person who was the Attorney General of California. You know, I mean, she sort of lives on this august level. Tim Walz is, I think, probably like the first legitimately kind of blue-collar guy you can point to in major U.S. politics for quite some time.
And he also, I heard the thing about where they're saying he's in the pocket of the unions, and he's like, I'm not in the pocket of the unions, I am the pocket. Like,
yeah.
He seems to go straight to attack mode. It's quite a contrast when the Democrats were kind of scared to attack Trump properly, but now they're going gung-ho.
What's interesting is he's not. Something that I find very attractive about him is that he's not an attorney. He did, in fact, not go to law school, which extraordinarily distinguishes him from every presidential and vice presidential candidate for the Democrats since Jimmy Carter.
Wow, that's quite a while ago.
So really the first one in my lifetime who's not an attorney. He also has military service in, I think, the Army Reserves.
Well, he was there for, 20 years?
Well, it's the reserves. So you essentially go do stuff on weekends or what have you. But yeah, so for 20 years he was in the reserves while he was a high school teacher and a football coach. And what I find very interesting is that he was actually never an officer.
Okay.
So he was enlisted. There's that distinction that is still very real in certainly U.S. military forces between sort of an officer class and enlisted class. And it's a real distinction. I mean, essentially, if you have a university degree, you get sort of siloed into the potential of being an officer. If you do not, you get siloed into being an enlisted man. It is like a legitimate blue-collar thing to be an enlisted member of the military. And while we've certainly had candidates, we haven't really had a president who's had serious military experience in quite some time. What little experience the candidates and presidents since then have been as officers. John McCain was, generally the guys who fly fighter jets are all officers. So they're just sort of working on this somewhat elevated plane, whereas Tim Walz might actually have more of a connection to what it means to be, one of the grunts who gets
boots on the
truly
ground, that
pushed
sort of
around.
thing.
So that's, I mean, there's a lot about this guy that is so attractive, and it is just such a contrast. He looks like he's 20 years older than Kamala, but he's actually the same age.
I thought that was funny.
Yeah, this is a 60-year-old. I think for sure Walz Mania is a bit oversold at this point, but I think it's I'm no doubt something will come out. I think
it's breathed the exact sort of air it needed into this campaign.
Yeah. Well,
have the MAGA heads, are they panicking? I'm reminded of, I don't know if you've watched King of the Hill, but there's a character called Dale Gribble who's very big into conspiracy theories, and Hank makes a friend with a man called the Junkyard Dog, and for some reason all I can think of is the Junkyard Dog scaring all these MAGA people.
Well, what's exciting about Walz is that it's, perhaps it's not as authentic as it's being sold as being, but I think it's probably accurate to describe, like, this is a guy who vaulted to the top of the Veep stakes. I mean, he was always on the list. He was a white guy, Democratic governor, but he wasn't high on the list. But he actually kind of changed Democratic messaging over the past couple of weeks. He's the first guy who sort of popularized this, man, the Republicans are just a bunch of weirdos. That is the message of the Democratic
Party. I remember
hearing
like, a school teacher came up with this campaign, so this is the school teacher?
Yes, this is the school teacher that came up with that campaign. And that's why he sort of vaulted ahead of all these. I mean, Shapiro was sort of seen as the guy, the most likely guy. He's the governor of Pennsylvania, which is a very important swing state, has very consciously, apparently, modeled his rhetorical style on Barack Obama, which is seen as amusing by some. And this guy really just, had a great media hit, kept on having great media hits, doing the yeoman's work of saying Kamala Harris is amazing and Trump and J.D. Vance are silly. And really sort of attracted a lot of people. What's been really stunning to me is I follow a lot, this won't surprise anybody, I follow a lot of very cynical left-wing people on Twitter who are very, not nihilistic overstates that they care too much, but have very dark and grim about most U.S. politicians and most of what's going on. And it's funny, Ken Klippenstein, who's this guy who's a national security reporter who's constantly breaking incredibly humiliating stuff for the U.S. government, just had this puff piece of like Tim Walz. He's not a lawyer. He's an actual high school teacher. He's like, he really just, and apparently it seems like his humility is one of the things that attracted the Harris campaign. The fact that he seemed unlike everybody else. He seemed to be pretty content to be just a pugnacious vice president and doesn't seem, though of course people are speculating about it, didn't seem to have particularly clear presidential ambitions himself. So I'm sure this time a month from now we'll be hearing about some
Well, did you not hear his terrible background? He had a DUI in the 90s.
Yes, which is also, I'm afraid, really relatable.
From what I understand, America seems to have quite a drink drive culture, which I found quite scary when I was there.
Oh, it's horrifying. We used to joke, and it's not very funny, that drunken driving was practically a varsity sport when I was in high school in the 1990s. Yeah, but and we shouldn't make light of that, of course. It's not like having a DUI in the last century is going to be a real deal breaker.
The joke seems to be that it might attract some Republicans to him.
Jeez, yeah. So yeah, I don't want to belittle that, but the guy seems like just such a unimpeachable saint at this point that there must be something dark going on there. That's my cynicism indicates.
So, Rob, is what you're telling me is you don't think World War III is going to happen?
Yes, that is a good segue. That's not a very good. Yeah, you've done better segues, man. You've done better segues, but thank you. You're right. We've already burned too much runtime on Tim Walz. What we're going to talk about today is once again the Middle East, and I think it's important to acknowledge that fatigue of talking about Israel and Iran and Hezbollah and all this stuff. Because that's a really, I don't think you can say that what Israel's doing to Gaza is at the most feverish pitch that it's been at, but it's still very consistently horrible. Day by day, week by week, it's, they've blown up a school. Oh, look, there's systematic rape going on in Israeli prisons of Palestinians.
Weren't they wanting to pass that as legal, to make it legal to rape prisoners?
I don't think they'd want to codify that. I mean, who knows? But it's a tension point, because enough people in the Israeli system who still want to believe that Israel is a civilized modern nation state became aware of this. We're like, oh gosh, this isn't just anti-Semitic propaganda. This is actually happening, and we're horrified. And the exact details escape me, but different parts of the Israeli security apparatus decided to try to crack down on this in a very minor way, and were really horrified to find that both Israeli thugs on the street, but also Israeli politicians who sit in the Israeli parliament and are in the Israeli government were speaking up for the right to rape Palestinian prisoners, which is pretty grim and horrific. And I think what I just want to talk about that fatigue issue is that you are all very sick of looking at this, and certainly this is a factor in the United States. Everyone's just like, yay, Kamala, Tim Walz, woohoo! And frankly, at this point, I think it is important enough, even for Palestine, to have Kamala and Tim Walz in there rather than Trump. That like at this point, I'm content to sort of sit back and not talk about it so much. But horror is continuing there, and the fatigue is part of the. I don't know if I would go as far as to say it's part of the strategy of Israel, but it is certainly the fatigue is something that they're benefiting from. Because how many times can you watch a mother cry as her children are burning? How many times can you hear practically the same story about the Israeli government kidnapping a mother, cutting off her legs, and then her dying in prison? That happened in the West Bank, not even in Gaza this week. It's all nightmarish, and it's easy to turn away. But we should probably continue to pay attention, because the chances of
things getting worse,
United States getting dragged into a very large, our $3 trillion war in the Middle East or Central Asia this century are very high, and they're spectacularly high at this point. And it seems like Israel wants to drag us into that. That's not seems like it. It's pretty clear, documented, and even the Biden administration is acknowledging it. That Israel is trying to start this war and drag the United States into it. I thought a good way to sort of get over the fatigue here of looking at this is to talk about some of the more hyperventilating takes on what's happening in the Middle East are wrong.
But I seen World War III trending on X, so it must mean it's going to happen pretty soon.
Absolutely. X and Elon Musk are famous for knowing exactly what's about to happen. Well, you must be very difficult for you in the UK, as Elon Musk has predicted there's a civil war coming.
Yes, but there's also talk that our X may be blocked until the rioting calms down.
Oh, really? That would be interesting. Certainly, there are bad takes on Twitter, and I think there was some lunatic out of Sequoia Capital, which is a venture capital fund, talking about how World War III was coming because of the most recent dust-up that Israel has started in the Middle East. And I think it would be a good way to start and to say that is hyperbolic and not going to happen. The chances of a new $1 trillion war for the United States are very high. The chances of China or Russia getting involved in this are essentially nil.
Well, you have to have powers that are somewhat equal, that think they can win, and Iran is nowhere equal to America. But you could have a Vietnam-style situation.
Well, what's interesting is that certainly there are folks in the United States who foster this kind of thinking, who are desperate, despite the fact that there's almost no real weight to it. For decades, folks in the United States have been trying to. Robert Kagan, who we've did an episode on, is a great example. Just these sort of neocon fantasists who desperately want there to be an axis of evil to fight against, who are trying to imagine this China, Russia, Iran axis into being. what's kind of extraordinary is that because of U.S. actions, there are stronger connections between these countries than there ever have been before. China, Russia, and Iran are about as natural a group of enemies as you can imagine. China and Iran both being sort of hyper-nationalist countries with big chips on their shoulders that share a massive border. So obviously that there's real tensions there, and across the Cold War, when they were both nominally communist superstates, there were actual shooting wars. Russia and Iran have a tremendously negative interaction. The whole point of the 1979 Iran Revolution, the reason why it was so strange, disturbing to really everybody in the world, East and West, was because it was completely outside of the context of the Cold War that everybody was used to. Wait, it's a revolution, but it's not a left-wing revolution? The Tudeh, the Communist Party, I'm not sure if Tudeh was flagrantly communist, but anyway, the left sort of socialist party in the Iranian Revolution was famously crushed by the Ayatollah Khomeini. So, it was very confusing. And Iran, because of where it is, Iran bordered on the Soviet Union until the fall of that entity, and also had a really negative experience with the Soviet Union and the Tsars. Iran was occupied, I believe, by both the Soviets and the British during the Second World War. A lot of strong negativity between Russia, China, and Iran is what I'm trying to say. However, the U.S. policy of full spectrum aggression against Russia, against China, against Iran has, over the past decade really, mostly, has started throwing these countries together in real ways. I think it's possible that by the 2030s, 2040s, 2050s, we could actually be in a world where these countries have real treaty commitments to each other that would require them to react if one of them were attacked by the United States. We are not there. Russia, I think...
And there's still a lot that can happen between then and now.
Yeah. I think Russia did sign a mutual defense pact with North Korea over the past couple of years. So, these things are possible, but they do not exist yet.
And also Russia hasn't the best track record of helping its allies when they ask for help.
Yeah, that's true. They had a pretty strong commitment to Armenia, though, in their defense.
They were busy.
Well, no, the Azeris were, as I keep saying, only taking Azeri territory that the Armenians happened to occupy.
Yeah.
The Russians clearly made a commitment to defend Nagorno-Karabakh that they did not keep, as we all well know.
But also, don't the Chinese keep doing really bad deals with Russia, and they're sort of like, maybe we don't want as much gas as you'd like to give us. The way the Western media make it out, it's like, China can't get enough gas, and it's like, hurry up and build it faster. And then when you look at the reality, it's like China's a bit like, we're okay, and could you give us a bit more of a discount? And it does feel like China might, I know this is a bit more hyperbolic, but if China got little bits of Russia by 2050, I wouldn't be surprised.
Oh, I would be. So Russia would still, I think, nuke Beijing if China tried to take. And Russia still has that capability.
Maybe if they offered it peacefully, threw a lot of money at it, and says, we'd make a lot more of this than you have.
Oh, well, like the U.S.-Mexico sort of vibe from the 1840s, where first the Russians are like, yeah, we want Chinese settlers to keep the thing economically viable.
Because there are, regions that China used to own, so it's not out of the realms of possibility that a region that Russia has, they've neglected it, it's underpopulated, and China would absolutely put that to use.
I think Russia would have to be in much more dire straits than it is now. And, anything's possible. But yeah, I was just, past couple of days, I've been looking into, there's a good Bloomberg story on it. Just the big story on the oil markets right now is that China just isn't importing as much oil. Or rather, their oil imports are not growing the way that they were expected. And that is one of the main reasons why oil prices are so soft. And that is a variety of dynamics, but it's EVs actually happening, actually impacting oil demand in very serious ways, and in very serious ways that are growing. So yeah, the affinities between Iran, between Russia, between China are not such that if Israel gets the war that it wants, and draws in the United States, that Russia and China are going to be jumping in. And if you don't have Russia and China jumping in with the United States on the other side, you don't get World War III. It seems fairly straightforward. I think it's worth talking a little bit about the relationship between Russia and Iran, which is absolutely growing in unprecedented ways because of Russian invasion of Ukraine, which is an evil thing that Russia did that was desperately worked for by the United States for decades. And we sort of got exactly what we wanted. And honestly, the fact that it has thrown Russia and Iran closer together is helpful for U.S. defense industry propaganda as well. So the fact that Iran is selling a lot of drones to Russia is super useful and is super useful for U.S. propaganda. But that is a outcome of U.S. Ukrainian policy.
Has China been backing off on selling Russia arms?
Well, China, that's a tremendously, what's the word? That is a tremendously fraught question. The Chinese, and I think most would agree, have really held off on providing military material.
Because they seem to supply basic things like tires, uniforms, boots, stuff like that, but they seem to just be buying them from shops nearly like anyone else could. But we don't seem to be, they're definitely not getting any like top technology from China.
Well, if China had decided to start providing artillery at cost, I think that this war would, well, it wouldn't be over, but it would
be a very different set of events.
It would be, yeah. So China is not providing that to Russia.
So really Russia only has Iran to buy anything from?
Oh, no. I mean, they've bought a lot from North Korea. They have, and the thing about Russia that they've managed that the United States has not, very humiliatingly, is they can actually build their own artillery rounds and actually have their own fairly serious military-industrial complex, whereas the United States has just a bunch of political motive.
I know technically Russia isn't at war, but you know it's in a war footing. Everything's geared towards the battle, while for America this is almost just like another thing America's up to. Like America isn't.
Is Russia not technically at war with
It's
Ukraine?
One of those things. It's like, oh, the Iraq War wasn't technically a war. America hasn't been in a real war since World War II, so they haven't pulled the "this is a war" button, but it's as close as you can get to it being a war, if you know what I mean.
Huh? That didn't change with mobilization?
No, it was still just So yeah, they still haven't gone full throated yet, but you know what I mean. In America's defense. America has its finger in so many pies. Ukrainian war's just one of them.
So. Yeah, just one of the things, and Israel could give us another one in the next not too soon. I think it is just specific about the Russia thing, the Russia-Iranian relationship. A lot of people got really freaked out in the past couple of days because I think Sergei Shoigu went to Tehran. In the aftermath, so we're in this time period right now where everybody, and likely by the time that this publishes, what will have happened is the Iranian retaliation for some incredibly irresponsible Israeli strikes.
And assassinations.
Yes. The great concern is that Russia sent a mostly disgraced but high-profile person to go and publicly meet with Iranian officials in this time period. So a lot of people are like, oh, wow, look at this. Russia's showing it's committed. And Russia is apparently selling some more advanced radar equipment to Iran. That's not nothing, but that is not a commitment to defend Iran in any way. No. That is not a commitment. And what was fascinating is sort of first we got the big stories about, Shoigu's in Iran. Look at this axis. Look at, they're getting together and World War III is imminent. And then we got a Reuters story. Putin asks Iran to avoid civilian casualties in Israel response, sources say. So the Russians, yes, are sort of cozying up to Iran, but they're kind of doing the U.S.'s work for them in that they are encouraging Iran to be as light as possible with this retaliation. So it's kind of interesting that it's like, no, it's actually not.
Doesn't Russia get on fairly well with Israel?
Well, it varies. It certainly depends.
Because I know isn't a lot of its isn't it like the third most spoken language in Israel is Russian?
Yes. it is worth pointing out, of course, that the reason that all of these Soviet and then I guess later Russian Jews went to Israel was rampant anti-Semitism. But there is absolutely...
But also the fact, you had countries that were collapsing and what appeared to be a fairly put-together country was saying, you can come here if you want. And absolutely, you don't know what tomorrow's going to be like. There's no bread, and then there's a country that seems to be perfectly fine. You're like, yeah, I'm going to go there.
Yeah, it's sort of interesting talking about how Netanyahu has made a lot of investments politically over the past decade in cozying up to really right-wing autocrats. That's been sort of Israel tries to find friends anywhere it can, but its sort of tightness with Putin or Netanyahu's attempts to build a relationship with Putin are sort of well documented. The weirdness of Russia being the main sponsor, and probably number 2 sponsor of Assad, and Israel constantly wanting to bomb Assad has been a very interesting tension over the past number of years. Israeli bombing of Syria has really stepped up since 2022, when Russia has been more distracted. But my understanding is that they've maintained a pretty strong, deconfliction approach. Israel really doesn't want to kill any Russians. And actually, Israel's strong desire to keep bombing Syria kept it from initially being too friendly to Ukraine when Russia invaded. So yeah, it's a fraught, interesting relationship. But exactly. That also serves to undermine this idea that we're careening towards World War III. That is not, in fact, something that has happened. But now, a half hour in, perhaps we should talk about what actually has happened.
So there has been escalation from what seemed to be an attack in the Golan Heights, which does seem to be from Hezbollah.
Yes,
has committed this. They tried to make it out like, oh, we didn't fire it, and so it's the Iron Dome missile line, but it's a couple of kilometers from an Israeli military base. So it's very likely that it missed it because it's sort of on a hill and then off-shot and sadly killed 12 children at a football field.
Yes, 12 Arab Druze children, which is not what Hezbollah wanted to do for sure.
No. Yeah. So from what I understand, the Druze they see themselves as Syrian. Yeah. And quite often they are entitled to Israeli citizenship, but quite often they don't take it. So they live in Israel, but don't really embrace citizenship fully.
So there are Druze in Israel, there are Druze in Syria, there are Druze in the Golan Heights, which I think most of the world still considers to be part of Syria. Yes. However, the United States officially does not, because Donald Trump decided to acknowledge Israel's annexation, and I don't believe Joe Biden has gone back on that.
No.
Media sources have just straight out reported this as a strike on northern Israel, which is surprising, I suppose. If the U.S. president says that the U.S. government, if 2 U.S. presidents say that the U.S. government acknowledges this as part of Israel, there's nobody else in the world who'd agree on that. But that's the way U.S. media is describing it. So it's perhaps not inaccurate to describe it as something that has happened. But I think it's interesting to talk about. Israel has managed to blow up things over the past month in Yemen, Lebanon, and Iran. I think it's worth talking about these things as sort of a hierarchy of things. The biggest strike, the most damaging, and I think the one that will lead directly to the deaths of the most people, actually took place in Yemen earlier in July. But I think that one is perhaps surprisingly the most justified strike that it undertook, because this was actually very straightforwardly in response to something that Yemen's Houthis had done. On July 19th, the Houthis were very proud to tell everybody that they had successfully sent a drone all the way to Tel Aviv that killed a civilian. And on July 20th, the Israelis said, okay, we'll blow up the fuel depot that much of your starving population depends on, which I think is kind of like a horrific thing for Israel to do, but is something they are entirely justified in doing. I've been saying since the beginning of the Houthi intervention against Gaza genocide that as heroic as you may feel for a thing for them to do, as morally justified as that may be, it's a pretty horrifically bad choice for the Yemeni people. The United States, actually, surprisingly, has been pretty restrained as far as in its 6-month attempt to stop the Houthi intervention with Red Sea traffic. Israel, in one day, I'd say, did more damage than the United States had done in 6 months with one strike. But this is a very straightforward retaliation. And I think that it is bringing a gun to a knife fight or bringing a nuclear bomb to a knife fight, as I think Israel did here, is a defensible approach for a surrounded country that has just been attacked in a very, very terrifying way by a new enemy. It's like, oh, you're going to come in and you're going to bomb, you're going to kill a civilian in my place? Well, none of your civilians get to eat.
Yeah.
I think you can quibble with that decision, but I think it's not really something that you can give Israel such a hard time for. Of course, at the root of this, the reason why they are in a fight with the Houthis is because the Houthis have decided to attempt to intervene in a genocide that Israel is carrying out. That is, of course, the underlying reasoning here. But as far as this sort of tit-for-tat, strike-for-strike dynamic, it's kind of hard to be that angry at Israel over this. The next step would be where things get, I'd say, a lot more amorphous. Yes, a lot more murky, is the conflict with Hezbollah. And this was a July 27th strike that we were talking about in the Golan Heights. I think the town was Majd al-Shams. Now, I think a lot of people who've been excessively believing of the standard story that Hezbollah did this. Is it most likely that Hezbollah carried this out? Yes, I would say so. I think the story that they were looking to hit an Israeli base and the missile...
And they also were publicizing that they had fired so many rockets, and
yeah,
it does seem very likely that it was them.
I think that's so plausible, but we're at this point, Rory, where I don't trust anything the United States says on this topic at all. And so far, it's Israel and the United States that have said that they did this, that Hezbollah did this, and Hezbollah continues to deny it. I think it's more than a little rich that Israel is using this tack that killed 12 Arab Druze, at best in a tragic mistake on Hezbollah's part, that they're using this as an excuse for escalation. The Hezbollah conflict, I'll be honest, I have difficulty wrapping my own head around what's going on in northern Israel. My understanding is that more or less since October 7th, Hezbollah and the Israeli military have been hitting each other fairly hard, but they're hitting each other fairly hard within the context of a sort of etiquette about who, where it's appropriate. And this etiquette is constantly being tested. Like, Hezbollah went this much too far into Israeli territory. So in return, the IDF does this. And then they, so it's, what we're talking about today is on a broader scale, tit for tat escalation games. My understanding is that Israel and Hezbollah have been playing these games every day and intensely and firing hundreds of rockets every day since October 7th.
Well, 33 Israeli civilians have been killed and 17 soldiers, while 100 Lebanese civilians have been killed and roughly 350 Hezbollah fighters have been killed. So it is escalating to a horrifying degree.
And that's the strange thing about Hezbollah, is that it has maintained a kind of deterrence with Israel for, I guess, 18 years now, since 2006. Hezbollah and Israel have just a very strange relationship that I haven't fully wrapped my head around. Fact is that Hezbollah exists as a national resistance movement. The reason Hezbollah exists is because Israel invaded Lebanon in the early 1980s. And Hezbollah succeeded. Hezbollah successfully booted Israel out of Lebanon.
And they left at the end of 2000?
In 2000. I think that Hezbollah made some poor decisions in the direct aftermath of that led to, they really could have just said, we won, maintained a militarized border with Israel, and really be kind of recognized as heroic by people all over the world. It seems like, much like the Houthis, they kind of wanted to continue the fight and decided that, oh, no, now we're fighting for Syrian territory, and kidnapped an Israeli soldier, and sort of started a new dynamic. In 2006, Israel got sick enough of this that they invaded. The general consensus is that Israel was humiliated by Hezbollah when they did that. And since then, there's been this sort of balance of terror. And my understanding of the deal is that southern Lebanon, Israel hits with bombs, and northern Israel, Hezbollah hits with bombs, and it's sort of a tit for tat. And this has spiked up at a variety of times since 2006. It has been at a sort of mid-level, fairly high, with those casualties you've talked about since October 7th. And I think it's a bit disingenuous and a bit strange for Israel to go straight from, oh, there was a misfired Hezbollah missile that killed more people, not Israelis, not Jewish people, than Hezbollah intended. We're going to use this as an excuse to bomb Beirut, which has happened. So, I mean, that's like the equivalent of Hezbollah bombing Tel Aviv. There's no question, everyone acknowledges that Hezbollah absolutely has the capacity to bomb Tel Aviv at great length.
So, yeah, they have an estimated 150,000 rockets, which is a staggering amount. I know they obviously won't fire all of them, but they would have so many of these, what I assume to be cheaper rockets, that they would exhaust the Iron Dome, and then they could just keep on firing, which is, nightmare fuel.
So a pretty clear part of this balance of terror that Israel and Hezbollah has maintained is like, yeah, you're not bombing major Israeli population sources. You're going after military establishments. And we're going to go after Hezbollah, but we're not going to bomb, say, Beirut, the biggest Lebanese city. So this is, whereas the tit for tat with the Houthis, I think, is entirely acceptable on the part of the Israelis. The tit for tat between Hezbollah and the Israelis that took place July 27th and then July 30th seems kind of insane, to just go out and bomb Beirut and kill Fuad Shakir, a highly placed Hezbollah guy. That's an insane escalation that I think would have been something that we'd have been talking about anyway. However, we're also talking about the fact that on July 31st, Israel killed Ismail Haniyeh, the head of the political wing of Hamas, and they chose to do it in Iran, which is an insane escalation.
But it also is to humiliate Iran, basically saying nobody's safe anywhere. If Israel doesn't like you, we will kill you regardless.
Yeah, and to be clear, Ismail Haniyeh, the head of Hamas, is a guy I was actually calling for the assassination of last October. This is, why are we going and murdering all these Palestinian children when you have a whole bunch of Hamas leadership sitting in Qatar? These are the people who should be killed. Doing it at this point in the conflict, after 9 months of conflict, when Joe Biden and the United States has said, Israel's just on the cusp of making a ceasefire deal with Hamas. Ismail Haniyeh is the guy that they were negotiating with. So this is Israel making a conscious choice to quite literally blow up any possibility of ceasefire discussion. Crucially, I've read books on Hezbollah, I've read books on the Houthis. I have not read books on Hamas. My understanding is that there is some tension within the Hamas movement between its military and political wings. Yahya Sinwar is the guy that the Israelis have been trying to find in Gaza since October 7th. This is the head of the military wing, the guy who was in charge of the attack. There's some question as to whether Ismail Haniyeh was even necessarily that aware or involved in the planning of the October 7th attack. There is no question but that Yahya Sinwar was at the head of it. And now, thanks to Israel, the dispute between the political and military wings of Hamas is over. Yahya Sinwar is now indisputably in charge of Hamas. So once again, through assassination, Israel has put the more extreme, more violent faction of the Palestinians in the driver's seat. So this is just an insane,
escalationally
destructive choice. I think it's not a coincidence that the week before doing this, Netanyahu was in the United States making announcements talking about how close he was to the United States and how Iran is the U.S.'s enemy.
And then he had a rush back because of the changing situation back home.
Well, yeah, I think he, claiming that the Mazda al-Shams thing, it seems, did Israel do the Mazda al-Shams attack? I think that's unlikely, but it's possible. I think that it probably was just a really convenient success, so a convenient excuse for them to act out in this way. And the fact that they didn't just strike Hezbollah, they struck the guy they were negotiating the ceasefire with in Iran is just, it's there should be no dispute in anybody's mind that Israel is trying to start a war. Israel is trying to start a war with Iran that the United States has to get into. And the degree to which the Biden administration has been willing to just sort of let this happen is infuriating.
Do you think there's a push to get this big war going before the US election is over? Like, does Israel feel like once America gets a new president sorted, it can then focus on Israel and then try to de-escalate? Or is there like, we have to do as much mayhem as we can before the election is over?
I think that it's about Israel wanting to kill more Gazans. And I think that there's a lot of stories that we're seeing that indicate that finally even the Israeli public is just like, what the hell? A lot of an interesting dynamic of the prisoner rape stories is the number of really dedicated Israel superfans in the United States, like people who are just like constantly, this is all Hamas's fault. Why are you on Hamas's side? If you don't like dead children, you love Hamas. It's bad enough that a lot of Israel superfans are just like, whoa. And I think Netanyahu can feel the ground shifting beneath his feet. And that is why he wants this war, because he knows that if he gets this war, he'll be able to stay in power and he'll be able to continue to kill Gazans at a faster clip. It's the same reason he's wanted a war since the get-go. They have not been subtle about this. It is an ongoing, quite horrific thing that they've wanted. And they did this in April. I'm not sure if we did a podcast episode on it or not, but on April 1st, they blew up an Iranian consulate in Syria, and with the consciousness that Iran would find this unacceptable. And what happened between April 1st and April 14th was quite extraordinary. Iran desperately doesn't want a war here.
Because you don't let everyone know where your slow-moving missiles are going to land.
Yeah. Yeah. And the United States, despite the idiocies and the complicity of the Biden administration in genocide, also, when it comes down to it, does not want a war. So while we are content, apparently, to allow Netanyahu to carry out a genocide, act in all these incredibly destabilizing ways, when the rubber hits the road, the United States ain't interested in the war.
Because this will be bigger than Iraq easily, won't it?
So much bigger than Iraq. So much bigger than Iraq.
Because it wasn't a joke that the Iraq military was pretty hopeless.
I mean, it was a surprise how hopeless. Well, I guess in 1990 it was a surprise how hopeless the Iraqi military was. By 2003, I guess we pretty much had that expectation. I mean, honestly, the Iraqi military probably had more tanks and whatnot than the Iranian military did. I mean, keep in mind that the Iraqi military was heavily bankrolled by the United States and our allies throughout the 1980s. So they had a lot of equipment anyway. I think the intensity of missiles and the way that missile and drone technology has changed, and the fact that Iran is acknowledged as something of a leader in that, indicates that this would be a much more serious, much more costly fight for the United States.
But it's also there's so many countries in between these two. Like, there's going to be massive collateral.
Yeah, no, it would. I don't think there would be any. There would certainly be multiple bombings in Tehran. There would never be a U.S. troop on the ground in Iran.
So you just have like a naval bombardment of Iran from the shore, from the American Navy.
Well, yeah, and most of the fighting would be in Iraq and Syria and Lebanon.
It is. It's also Iran is very mountainous, which makes it very difficult to fight in.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question of like large scale occupation of Iran. It's just simply not going to happen. And we have a very clear sense. I actually printed out this Wall Street Journal article from June 12th. I'm actually kind of paranoid about the amount of, how all the news is online now. So if there was a particularly embarrassing sentence in a Admiral Stavridis Bloomberg post that I remember reading that I could never find again. So I print stuff out now because I'm afraid that stuff just gets deleted.
It's your old man thing.
Yeah, But this was a passage in a Wall Street Journal article, June 12th, 2024, talking about how an Iranian-backed militia, which is an absurd way to describe the Houthi government of Yemen, but anyway, how an Iranian-backed militia ties down U.S. naval forces in the Red Sea. And is basically saying, the go-to paragraph is, the Navy says it has spent about $1 billion on munitions. This isn't for the fuel for the ships. This isn't for the logistics. This isn't for all the, this is just $1 billion on munitions used in defending the Red Sea, conducting more than 450 strikes and intercepting more than 200 drones and missiles. So to carry out just 450 missiles and intercepting, which presumably means just another 200 missiles, drones and missiles cost $1 billion for like 600 shots. Leaving aside the implications that if you do the math on this means that every day of a war over Taiwan would cost the United States about $1 trillion. This is also an indication of just how badly and how incredibly expensive a war with Iran, how badly it would go and how incredibly expensive.
Is that like well over $1 million for each drone taken out?
Yeah, I think that's the math. Yeah,
that is just an insane number.
Yeah, I think that's the math. And that, keep in mind, that's just the munitions. That's not the probably billions of dollars it has cost to keep these ships running and regular functioning at the base in Djibouti or what have you. So yeah, like that war. So anyway, between April 1st and April 14th, the last time Israel tried to start a war with Iran, I think in April 1st and April 14th, that was meant to be a distraction from the ICJ, the ICC. I think there was essentially the international legal community deciding that Israel was likely committing genocide. As a distraction to change the topic, Israel bombed an Iranian consulate in Syria. And between April 1st and April 14th, Iran and the United States essentially negotiated an attack on Israel. It's quite extraordinary. The timing was pretty clear. The targets were pretty clear.
They may as well have tweeted it.
Yeah, pretty much. And the United States, the UK, Jordan, and some other countries.
Oh, yeah. They got a great bit of training that day.
Were able to shoot down everything that Iran had carefully telegraphed that it was shooting.
I think it like 99% got shot down, but obviously whatever they were aiming at was just, there was nothing there because whatever got through didn't kill anyone.
I think there was one Bedouin Israeli Arab woman who was injured, is my understanding.
Because I think it's the largest drone attack in history.
Well, so it was 300 drones and missiles, 300 plus drones and missiles.
So the largest drone attack in history killed nobody?
Yeah. Intentionally. That's the thing, though. That was the plan.
It was all performance?
Yes, that was the plan. And I think we're now, at the time of recording, we are we're already 8 days from this attack, this Israeli attack on Iran. And it did take 2 weeks last time for Iran to put this together.
Aren't you glad you're not the new president of Iran?
Well, that's the insane thing, is that the new president of Iran was elected as a reformist, as a guy who was open to discussions. And Haniyeh, the Hamas guy who was negotiating the ceasefire, was killed because he was in Iran for the inauguration of the peace-minded president of Iran. Like, they're on so many different levels. Israel's just screaming, I want to start a big war. I want to cost the United States trillions of dollars. And the Biden administration is just like, I mean, there's been, on background, Biden's furious. There was the 11 millionth story coming out with Joe Biden swore at Netanyahu came out again this week, and it doesn't mean anything. Nothing has changed.
Yeah, but he could have said "damn" for all we know.
Yeah. Nothing has changed.
But all the fact he could possibly just do nothing and delay a shipment of munitions for a couple of weeks, which would terrify Israel. Like, there's so many things. They're in full control of this.
There are infinite things that could be done, and the Biden administration is simply not doing it. So the key question now. By the time, so we're recording this on Wednesday the 7th. It'll be uploaded on Monday, and by the time you're listening to this, you could, it's entirely possible that Israel and Iran and the United States could be exchanging missile fire.
And possibly Lebanon.
Oh, of course.
150,000 estimated.
All of these things are very real possibilities. But again, I think we're dealing with the restraint of Iran. I think that Iran probably is looking for something that they can hit without killing too many people, and that can plausibly be seen as restoring deterrence, with the understanding that Israel desperately wants a war. It's a very difficult calculus that Iran has to make. The thing is, they don't really, just as Israel desperately wants a war while there's an election threatened in the United States that sort of is unmobilizing for the Democrats in power, Iranians are very conscious that there's about to be new people in town, and they don't have any illusions. They know that Harris and Walz are just as likely to be, say nice things and be essentially the reincarnation of Joe Biden. But there's a chance. There's a chance that they can have a better situation, and they don't want to put Kamala Harris in the position of already being in charge of a war that's being fought. And it is kind of interesting that it is kind of a no-win situation for Iran. I think that they absolutely have the capacity to carry out horrific damage in Israel, but they do not have the capacity to actually drive people out of Israel. What they do have the capacity to do, if things get really bad, if tens of thousands of Israelis start dying under Israeli bombardment, is they do have the capacity to force out all the Israelis that have easy family connections to the United States and Europe, which is actually the most moderate population of Israel. So if Iran and Hezbollah truly do unleash hell, I think what you'd see is maybe 100,000 Israelis leave, who are the wealthiest and most liberal and most peace-oriented of the Israelis, which would essentially just make Israel even more extreme. It's neither one can really, short of Israel just straight up nuking Tehran, which is, I think it's a 5% possibility, but it's a bigger chance than one would like.
It's a non-0%.
It is a non-zero, and even in the context of Israel nuking Tehran, it's not like Iran's going to go anywhere. And if they were to nuke Tehran, then oh my God, the unity and strength of the anti-Israel platform worldwide would be truly something to behold.
But if Iran did kick off, it will be annihilated.
What will be annihilated?
Well, the concept of Iran, America will just completely destroy it.
I mean, I don't think that doesn't seem likely to me.
You think it'll be like Iraq War, the first Gulf War?
I think that maybe the mullahs will fall, and there'll be a military dictatorship that's even more committed to fighting Israel and the United States. I don't think we have the money to go in and occupy the way we did Iraq. Certainly not with this garbage military-industrial complex that, it charges us $1 billion to fire 600 shots. What would happen, I think, is that we'd see another 1 million dead people in Iraq and Syria. I think it would be incredibly horrific. It would be incredibly... we couldn't beat the Taliban. Why would we be able to beat the military and theocratic regime in charge of a country of 80 million that actually can manufacture its own weapons, its own heavy weapons? No, I don't think we'd I think we would beat Iran to the extent that we would be able to scrape them out of Iraq and Syria and Lebanon if we really wanted to, at the cost of millions of lives. But why would we do that? That certainly wouldn't be good for Israel's security. I mean, keep in mind that the reason that Hezbollah the greatest challenge thus far to Israel exists is because Israel invaded Lebanon in the 1980s, destroying, to be clear, I mean, Israel, among others, destroyed reasonable functioning government in Lebanon for all time in the 1980s. Not that it was ever really, I mean, it was a bad system from the get-go. Destroying Iran or killing another 2 million people in Iraq and Syria will not actually add anything to Israel's long-term security. I think people are really not paying enough attention to what the Saudis have created with the Houthis in Yemen. Hezbollah is actually kind of you consider the underpinnings of Hezbollah. You know, Lebanon is a country of 6 million people. It is significantly smaller than Israel. And Hezbollah's roots, I think there's some crossover, but the vast majority of the people who support are the recruiting grounds for Hezbollah are the Shias of Lebanon, which is like 2 million people. The Houthis are a government of a country of 30 million people. They've probably only got control of 20, 25 million. And, you know, maybe only 15 million of those folks are committed enough, or maybe only 10 million of those folks are committed enough Zaidi Shias to be recruiting grounds. But so they've, you know, at minimum 5 times the recruiting ground, control of an entire country, and a military force that I can conceive of perhaps rolling into the holy cities one of these years in Saudi Arabia. And yeah, people are really already the balls out aggression of the United States over the past 20 years has created a new, much more dangerous, much more powerful version of Hezbollah in the Houthis. And Netanyahu is somehow thinking that creating...
It's a good idea.
It's a good idea to do it again, just against Iran, a country of 80 million. It's absolutely ludicrous. And actually, you know, it's interesting. Israel will endure, but Israel absolutely lost its mind at losing 1,000 people. If they actually get this real war with Hezbollah and Iran that Netanyahu so desperately wants, we're going to be talking about tens of thousands of dead Israelis to no real purpose.
It was to keep Benjamin in power, so is that not a great cause?
I guess, man. I guess. So yes, once again, we are concluding on a really happy note. But
I would say it's unlike, well, we have confirmed that World War III won't be happening.
Yes, that's a positive, I suppose.
And hopefully Iran shows a lot of restraint and tweets where they're going to attack a big empty field and everyone can practice shooting drones. But it might be 400 this time, Rob.
That sounds great, but I mean, the key thing is that Iran has said quite distinctly that's not how it's going to be this time.
Okay.
Well, we'll see. We might already know by the time this broadcasts.
Let's hope there's some sort of incredible peace agreement between now and we are releasing.
That'd be great.
That would be great. Do you know what else would be great? If you could catch us next time on the More Freedom Foundation podcast.
The More Freedom Foundation is also available on YouTube and TikTok. Rob's Twitter is RobOLaw, and he's also written a book called Avoiding the British Empire, What It Was and How the US Can Do Better. And music provided by Kevin MacLeod.